How's it going, guys? Matt here from Code Tech Tutorials, and just wanted to go over some r/CPP questions, courtesy of Reddit and its user base over there. So the first question, C++ programs wrongly flagged as virus. So you're running software, you're testing things out, antivirus pops up, thinks your program's a virus, tries to remove it, tries to delete it, tries to make a report. And how do you fix this? The best answer seems to be from you should be able to exclude your build directory as well as intermediate files from your antivirus. So you probably need to go to your antivirus and say, hey, things that are going on here, don't even scan. That's probably the best answer, because as you're playing around with memory, C++ is a pretty powerful language. You're going to be doing stuff that antivirus will pick up as, hey, you're moving memory around in a weird way I'm not used to seeing. There's not proper checking, whatever your antivirus is doing. It's pretty normal when you're learning to code with C++. And yeah, I would say just do this. That's probably the best thing you can do. There are some other answers here. To make your program not be flagged, you need to sign the executable. Okay, if that's not something that interests you, you probably aren't selling or distributed to untrusted users. In that case, usually bypassing the flagging and run it anyway. Either pay for a certificate or have your friend authorize the individual program. Click the link and just tell the OS the program is safe. You need to sign your executable with valid keys. So those are some more advanced things. Some pretty solid answers there. Let's go on to the next question. The best C++ book for an intermediate Python programmer. This is a really odd question to ask in here, to be honest. Best book? You can always get lists of the best books whenever you want. Just search for a list of the best books of whatever the topic is. But for an intermediate Python programmer, that's where this question gets odd to me. C++, let's just see what the answers say. He asks what the best book is, and this guy just says, get a book. Just get a book. All right. Well, it looks like he does go on to say some useful stuff other than just get a book, or go to learncvp.com. I don't know about LearnCVP. I haven't went through all of it. I found that there was something that wasn't right about it to me. I felt like I wasn't learning very well. So I didn't get very far in it, but that was like also 3 or 4 years ago. So the LearnCVP might be completely different now. So I'm not going to fully discredit it because I don't know anymore. Start from the beginning in either case. C++ is vastly more different than Python. You need a basic understanding of how the computer, CPU, memory, and OS works. Things that Python completely hide for you. I don't think Python completely hides this, but I'm not an expert with Python. Just when you see a word like completely, you generally know that it's a false statement no matter what they're saying. Okay, we got another answer here. A tour of C++, intended to be the first overview of a language for programmers who already know different languages. That's a good answer. A tour of C++ is probably pretty good. Looks like if someone asked me this, I would generally say I can speak for the books that I've learned from. This one is very good. It's probably actually a lot like a tour of C++. Its principles and practices using C++. It gives a lot of good examples about how to do common things that you would want to do. That really helped me at times. Holy crap, this price has gone up. Anyway, I'll leave a link to this down below. I'll scroll through some other ones, but generally these you can kind of trust these stars for the quality of these books, especially when they've got a lot. 4.5 is pretty solid. You're going to get a pretty decent understanding of the language from these books. But one thing I've noticed about these programming books and about learning C++ in general is you kind of have to learn C as well, because a lot of C++ has some C in it somewhere that either is legacy or they haven't made a better way to do with the standard library or something like that. So I would also recommend learning the basics of C in general if you're learning C++. So you might want to pick up a book or just go through a crash course on that. It's going to talk a little more about the memory management. That's some fundamental stuff. So there's a lot of other books here. I can't really speak for any of these, but as you can see, there's plenty with pretty high rankings. So when in doubt, yeah, sure, take a few recommendations, but also just pick up some that seem best for you. That if you're into game development, you could put like game dev on here and you'll see some good ones. Let's go on to the next question. Here's a good one. How do you guys test and import libraries? This is something I talk a lot about on the channel in general. I have some experience with C++. However, I haven't written much software. Just wanted to write a small library, and I've run into two problems. How do you test it? How to use it in other apps? I have like a gazillion videos on these two subjects. Mostly how to use it in other apps, but it's basically the same, because if you can use another app, you can test it. You just check that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing with your app, basically, for a test. Yeah, there are frameworks, and that's a lot of side topics. I plan on making some detailed videos about using some test libraries. One of the top answers here is basically use a package manager. If you're on Windows, VC PKG is great. Conan's probably great. I haven't used it a lot myself. Yeah, sure, you could set it up in Conan so that your other global stuff sees it. But he's talking about just linking it, basically. What you do is you link your library. I'll leave a video down below that explains this in a couple different ways. Or you can just search my channel for like C++ libraries, because I have some how-tos on that sort of stuff. It's not like a simple answer. Sure, I could give you a quick answer like, you just link it, but if you don't even know what that means, like, you're going to be lost, right? Yeah, that's why some of these questions are hard to answer, is because you kind of need more scenarios about exactly what you're doing to give you like a direct answer, but you can go get a broad knowledge of it, and that's going to be really helpful when you're new. And as far as testing, if you're on Windows, just use either CTest from CMake, which I need to make a video on. If you're using Visual Studio, there's also tests here. You can go to File, New Project, and then you go to Native Unit Test. So this is just the little test library that comes with this, and you get another project. So like, in this project I have my main library, which is named AA Engine. And this core test is a native unit test. So yeah, you have to link your library to it. And the easiest way to do that is to actually just right click on it and go to add and then reference, and then just check on your library, and it should set up the majority of the stuff. And this core test, you do have to build it, and then you go to tests, run all tests. So this is what I use when I don't feel like working hard, basically, and downloading Google Tests and setting up different ones. This is the native. If I hit play, it's going to run this example project. It's not what I want. So to run the test, you go up to test, run all tests. If you don't see it, you got to go to Test Explorer probably, and then you should have a run all tests here. And you can also run individual tests, and you go write these tests. There's examples from Microsoft, but basically it gives you this little framework where you make these test methods, give it a name, do whatever you want, make some certs in there to make sure it's doing what you think it's doing. Really, really basic test there. But you get the point. In general, it's going to look something like that for testing. Concurrency in C++. Looking for good resources for multi-threading in C++. Another really big subject. Yeah, I would say just start with a good, reputable resource and start simple. Start really simple with multi-threading, because it gets confusing real quick, and you probably want to have a good understanding of some of the stuff we've talked about earlier in this video, like the core concepts of C and C++, because you get really kind of deep into memory management with multi-threading, as you need to decide which threads are working on what, and make sure they're not both trying to write to the same piece of memory at the same time. This is true. There are lots of CPPCon talks, and I'm sure there's plenty of books on it too. But yeah, that's as specific as I'm going to get on this one. Let's go to the next question. Accessing map elements. Explanation. All right, so he has a question, just confused about what this line is accessing. Can't understand it for the life of me. Okay, well, it's answer equals 0. Well, this is a Boolean check, and it's multiplying by begin, which is going to be the first element of the map. So it's multiplying a true or false. So if this is false, it's going to be 0. It's going to multiply by 0. And if it's true, it's, who knows, it should be a 1, but it's not necessarily going to be a 1. So All right, mp.begin. So the first element of the map and the second part of that. So a map has a key and a value. The key, which it would be called first here, is like a string or an int or some unique element that can't be repeated. The second is what it maps to. So it's whatever the second element is of the map, or whatever the value is at the start of the map. Hope that makes sense. I could probably draw it real quick. So a map is essentially a ordered list of pairs. And when you have a map, just say map here, and you give it a name. We're just going to call ours, call it the same thing that had MP. So you fill it up with elements. It has two different values, one here, and we'll say one here. This one is the key, and this one is the value associated with that key. So you have a bunch of these, and that's basically it. The keys in a map are unique. If you try to add another one with the same key, it will overwrite the value, because that's also a way you can access the values, is by the map key. They are not doing that here. They are instead using begin, which is going to be an iterator that points to the very first thing in the map. So if you got a big list of them, it's pointing to the very first one at the top. And it's going to be ordered, so it should be based on the key, however it comes, based on your ordering algorithm. And second, accesses the value of it. So it's accessing this. If they said first, they'd be accessing the key, which you generally don't want to do that. Usually you find it by the key and you want the value. So yeah, I would expect this, see, like they're, I don't know if this is a mistake or not. This whole thing here, answer equals 0, is just going to be a true false, basically. It's just checking if it's true or false. And then they're multiplying it by whatever the second value is. I can't fathom why this would be a thing to do, but I hope that explains maps. Just the multiplying by a true or false really confuses me. Maybe someone that's new wrote this code, and this is supposed to be dereferencing, and they're not aware of what this does or something like that. That's my guess. All right, let's go on to the next question. This isn't a question, this is a demand. I request all of you kindly give me a list of professional acclaim list of C++ certificates. This is a bad question because it's not a question, it's a demand. I'm getting the impression that this guy doesn't speak good English, so he might not be aware of how he's wording this. But to just go to a question forum and start a question with a demand of I request all of you to give me your list of something, it's a little awkward, okay? You're probably not going to get any good responses, probably going to get snarky comments. But it would be better to say, are there any C++ certificates that are worth getting? Question mark. There's a good answer down here. In the past, when I asked a manager who hired me for my first C++ job, he laughed. It's not really something you get certified in. You can generally figure it out by what pieces of software the person has produced. The certifications don't really mean that much. It means a lot more to have things under your belt that kind of prove your skills. The certificates are just fluff that they don't necessarily equal reality. Okay, programming is really hard, and if you mess it up really badly, it's going to cause serious problems. It's not like in other areas where you can say, hey, I've attended this course, I understand what you guys expect. This is like, it's very math and science related, so there isn't really room for interpretation. It's like the memory works exactly how it works. You either understand it or you don't. And the certificate can say that you showed up somewhere or went through something, but unless we actually see your proof of concept in your own work, you can't really rely on the certificate to mean much. Yeah, I hope that helps. Let's go on to the next one. Here's an interesting one. I want to make an MP4 to MP3 file converter in CPP. I don't want to use libraries. Where do I start? How difficult will this be? Okay, I hear that you don't want to use libraries, but here's the thing. They've probably already done it. And I'm not saying use the library. I'm saying go look at their source and see how they do it. And you'll have your answer. And if you don't understand the source, it's going to be a scale of 11 to do. If you understand the source, it's going to be like a 1 or a 2. So there's a pretty big gap in there. You might be able to like, another thing you could do if you don't want to look at their source, because these are open source, I'm pretty sure, you could look at the very specific binary details of how an MP4 works and how an MP3 works. Maybe it's not binary, I'm not sure, I haven't looked at them precisely. And you could come up with your own way to do the conversions. And who knows, maybe you'll come up with something that nobody else did, and you'll be able to improve libraries or come up with your own. But the best place to start is probably to look at these libraries and just see how they do it. Let's see what other people answered. You need to re-encode. Oh, this guy says 11, you need to re-encode. Yeah, that's... If you need to ask this question, you haven't learned enough C++. Yeah, I'd say that's true. It's kind of basically what I'd say. Well, I think that answers that well enough. Let's go on to the next one. We got one more. Okay, this is an odd question. We seem to get a lot of these here. Function objects, question mark. Hey, so why is passing a function object faster than passing a function? That doesn't even make sense. I don't even know what that means. I could try to tear it apart and understand it, but I think he's just doesn't quite understand something. He's missing something. This is true only if the object is small or passed by reference, and if the function call operator is small and defined to be inline. Do you even know what you're talking about? But here's my problem. Where are you getting this information? What are you talking? Let's just continue. What if I define a function inline and then pass it to a function? Isn't it faster than a function? Oh my God, what's happening? Okay, this does bring up a good point though. I would be happy if someone explain. No one's going to be able to explain that because your question doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I think what you're looking at, or what you're talking about, you're either talking about lambdas and how they work, and C++ can be used as a totally functional language. You don't have to use it as an object-oriented language exclusively. You can do a lot of functional stuff. You basically use a lot of lambdas. Assign lambdas as an object. You can say, hey, this function is equal to this, or whatever. You basically make a variable, and the variable is a function, and you can pass that function somewhere. And that's, but if he's also, maybe he's asking about passing by reference or passing a pointer to a function. So like when you have a function defined, let me just write an example real quick. Okay, so first, lambdas. If you're in a modern version of C++, you can have a variable named whatever you want, and you can set it equal to a lambda, which looks like this. This is basically a blank function that does nothing. This is what it captures from your current scope, and this one here is what you're passing in, and this one here is what it does. And then you can use this var anytime you want, like so, and it'll call the function. So that's essentially a lambda. Go look more at lambdas if you're confused about that. There's a lot you can do with them, but that's like the very, very basics right there. So let's move past the lambda thing for now, and let's talk about functions. Now this really comes with the basics of functions. So they look like this, right? They have a return type, a name, all the values you pass in, and then whatever it does. And somewhere in here, you need to return whatever it expects. And if you don't want to return anything and you just want to do something, make a void. And there's a lot of different ways to operate about these. So this pass in, just declaring it like this will make copies of whatever A was and whatever B was. So if you call it, say we have float a value 1 and a value 2. And then we want to call this example func on them, pass in value 1, value 2. That will make a copy of value 1 and a copy of value 2. Even if you use the same names, it'll still make copies. That's not relevant. It's called shadowing if you end up using the same names but in different scopes. Don't do that. Try to avoid that at least. If you're okay with them being copies, then that's fine, because you could say return, let's just do an operation. We could just do A times B, and it would return what you would expect. I could write this in different ways. such as we could hold the value, result, A times B, and then return the result. It just depends on how you want to do your processing, because you might want to say something like, I don't know, check if result is greater than 10. You might want to clamp it, for example, and result to equals 10. And you can do the same for whatever you want before you return. So it really just depends on how your function is. But let's talk about a few other things. So what if you put const here? Well, typically you want const here. Of course, it varies depending on what you're doing, but like 90% of the time you want const here, because that basically says this value can't change. Don't change this value, which is typically what you want in a function, but not always. Because what if these are not const, then you can play with these copies. You could say, let's just assign a new value, and you can start doing recursive things or whatever you want, or recursive might not be the right word for it. You don't want to recurse this function because it would make copies of these. Let's not talk about recursion. It's just going to make this more confusing. All right, but basically if they're not const, you can legally assign them and change them, but that's not going to change the ones you passed in because these are copies. However, if you do this, if you say bring them in by reference, you're actually working with these original values. So value 1, value 2. If you're suddenly bringing them in by reference, whatever you change them to will reflect. So maybe that's what he's talking about in the question. And usually when you're doing that, maybe you're returning a success value because you're having your results already stored somewhere. And usually you want to label these as out or something like that. Out, val. So we could say, we can make this void, and we don't have to return anything. We could say, no, you can't change A, no, you can't change B, but bring them in by reference. And this is the fastest because you're not making a copy and there's no risk of accidentally changing these values. But this one here that you want to be the out value is not const because you want to be able to change it. And this is one of the fastest performing functions because, well, there's no copies being made. So maybe that's what he's asking. So it's worth it to get an understanding of how this reference thing works. Sure, you could also do it by pointer, and that's going to bring in a copy of a pointer, which is notably much smaller than the piece of data. But you have to be careful because this pointer is the only thing that's const in this situation. The data that it's pointing to is not const. You could still have problems. Yeah, I hope that explains it as well as can be. If you don't understand that stuff, go back to the core basics. Hopefully this gives you a little primer so that when you do read the stuff on it, it'll really click. But yeah, that's basically it. So let's just finish this function before we go on. So yeah, by reference there, const so you can't modify them, by reference so it doesn't make a copy, and the out value can be modified. But now we would need to call this with an out value. So maybe we'd make a float here, and you probably want to initialize, by the way, too. I'm not doing that. Then you pass in result there, and now you can go out val equals A times B or whatever your function does, and your result would be proper because this is going to actually change it right here. So this would be a pretty fast function since it does everything by reference, and you would get your result. Since it's such a simple function, it would be easier to just not have a function and just do the thing immediately. But yeah, you probably get the point. Functions typically do more than just multiply one thing, right? Let me know if you like this sort of video, and maybe I'll do some more of them. Happy C++ learning. Peace out, guys.